Thanks, Kumar, for giving me this opportunity. Our topic for today is data quality management in complex cloud integration scenarios. So, here is a brief profile introduction for both of us. So, Sanjam has been with SAP for some time and he has overall 17 plus years of industry experience. He has functional knowledge in various areas, including SAP Commerce Cloud, Field Service Management, Sustainability, and ERP. And of course, his for the last 10 years, he's working on customer facing integration scenarios, customer facing implementations, and has sound knowledge on the customer landscape. Similarly for me, so I have overall 19 years of experience, and out of which 15 years is in SAP. I have worked in various domains, including CRM, ERP, commodity management, and for the last 10 years, I have been working in SIM IBSO, where I work actively on the customer projects, which gives us an advantage in the sense that we now are more aware about the customer landscape and the problems which happen in in the business world, in the real world. So a little bit about the abstract. So about what our paper is about. So we know that the data exchange between various components needs to be done even in earlier era when we had the on-premise enterprise application interface. However, with the cloud computing coming in, a new complexity is added in terms of integration between on-premise and cloud applications, as well as the data exchange which is required with external interfaces, and this needs to be catered by a product in a highly diversified customer landscape. So each customer integration landscape is unique, and it is good that it is unique, because that is what gives the customer its competitive advantage. But at the same time, as a software provider, it makes it a little bit more challenging in terms of what features and what things the product has to support. So keeping that in mind, data exchange, the entire data management becomes much more complicated, because we need to ensure the data availability and data integrity. It is also critical to respect the legal and the ethical boundaries under which this enterprise software operates, and this is where our data quality and integrity governance model comes into picture. So we have tried to give a model which is quite generic in nature. At the same time, it is covering all the complex topics, or different topics, diversified topics, which needs to be covered as a part of data quality governance that an enterprise solution should have. So let's take a look into the specific customer project from where the thought started. So I would not be able to name the customer, but yeah, this customer is an administrative division of a state government of a developed country and is responsible for collecting taxes of various revenue lines, administering grants, and recovering debts on behalf of the people. Now, this transformation project, this started in 2018 to be precise, and this is spread over a period of 5 years. So this goes on till 2022, where the generic guideline of the transformation program was to overhaul the entire IT infrastructure of the revenue services model for a future solution, which is focusing on three primary users. First is the client, who would be using the application to file the taxes, then the particular customer's staff, which has to do the routine governance of the tax that has been filed, and also make the system more intelligent so that the staff can move from the basic task to more value added tasks. And of course, it would help the community, because overall, once if the taxes increase, the funding for the development increases. So adding a little bit more details about the program, this program was from 2017 and it will go on till 2022. We have done around 6 releases. And the reason was that this particular organization wanted to be in ahead of the technology, to ensure that they use the new technologies to better themselves. And the strategic objective was to get more trust from the clients and enhance services through smart use of digital methods, and take advantage of the data which was available. So why was data important for this particular customer? This because as a tax agency, it was important that they were getting the right amount of tax from the right people at the right time. Now, poor data quality would mean that data, either they would not get the revenues, or the revenue would not happen on the right time. So and now they were the revenue streams has increased, so they're not getting data only from the transactional systems but also from the external government sources and non-government sources. So they wanted to capitalize on the additional data that they're getting and build an intelligent system in order to uh, help their clients in being more in being more compliant to the revenue timelines. So with this, so this was an example for this particular customer. But with this, I would now come back to why data governance is the need of the hour. So even for the participants and for everybody who is in the business of enterprise solution development in some form or the other. So there is a growth of big data. So every 2 days we create as much data as we did from the beginning of the time until 2003. And now the business and the world is depending more and more on data. So the impact of the data is right from space exploration, healthcare to political elections. Data is used in decision making everywhere. Then we are moving towards more, we are going closer and closer to cognitive computing. And this is again where data comes into, which feeds on data. So right data will get us the right results from the cognitive computing, and the right results from the software. Data is becoming a key business asset which is central to the success of company. There's an explosion of usage of external data as compared to getting your own data and using the data from the transactional system for the analytics and some predictions. So every business therefore needs a robust data strategy. So with this, I would now like to request Sanjam to take it up. Over to you, Sanjam.
Thanks, Sonal. Okay. So one of the aspects, right, while we were taking, into account the problem statement which Sonal mentioned for one the customer was looking at the data integration approach, right? We have generally 5 data integration approaches, which you would also see on this slide. I will, touch base on briefly on each of these integration approach, and also mention which approach we took while we were, while we we're trying to solve the definition problem statement which Sonal mentioned. The first data integration approach was the manual data integration, right? I mean, as the name suggests, it is occurs when data manager oversees all aspects of integration, right? Which means use connecting to different data sources, collecting the data, and clearing it, right? So he's overall responsible from the retrieval to the presentation, right? Obviously, this is generally done commonly using a custom code. You write a custom code, and that's where you generally have this integration, manual data integration approach being used. Second one is the middle data integration, which is especially handy when a business integrating is legacy system with the newer ones, where the middleware would act as an interpreter, right? When we look at the third integration approach, which is the application-based integration, it is like software application does all your work, right? They will locate, retrieve, clean, and integrate the data, right? The fourth integration approach is what we generally do is what we call as uniform access integration, right? I mean, this technique, access the data from, I would say, different system, different sets, and present it uniformly, right? And it does while allowing the data to, remain in this original location, right? It is very common. It's very similar to the fifth, I would say, data integration approach, which is called the common story integration, or is also normally people refer to as data warehousing, right? The only difference I would probably is for a business need where there isn't data isn't burden and you don't need a copy or a backup. That's where you would typically use the uniform access integration. But on the other hand, if you need the backup or the copy so that you can manipulate data, that's where you would generally use the common story integration. because here in the common storage you will have the data as a copy, and the data analyst can manipulate and then you know present the data or to work on the data aspects, right? Now, obviously, while choosing any of these data integration approach, you have to look at the problem statement or the requirements of the customer, plus the pros and cons of each of this data approach, right? If I take it to example quickly, middle data integration, right? The upside would be that it is easy access to systems, but the downside of the manual integration approach would be to look at that middleware would not work for all systems, right? Which means and you obviously and you need to have or be a developer with the technical knowledge to to develop it or to implement it, I would probably say. Similarly, for manual data integration, for example, you would have the all the I would say, since one person is responsible, you have the full control, but on the downside you will need to look at the scaling would be a problem, right? or or you would have more prone to data errors, right? So the aspect is, you look at the pros and cons and the requirements. For the problem statement which Sonal mentioned briefly, we looked at our was the common storage integration. The reason was we wanted, since it was a tax revenue, what Sonal mentioned, we wanted to run numerous queries while maintaining the uniformity in data appearance. Okay. Along with that, we also used the middleware data integration because we had still had some touch points from the legacy system. So we had a combination of both common storage and the middleware integration data approach which we used, but definitely more towards the common data approach which we used, right? One of the others, obviously, once we have decided once we decided the data approach, we also have to look into the what cloud provider you're using or what system you're using. That is also very, very important, along with the data approach or the data integration approach which you take. Now, along with that, once you have the data integration, what are the other aspects which we also looked into while we were working on the project was the data flow considerations, right? And why we had to look into data flow consideration was we also wanted to look into the, how it will happen, how the data exchange would happen, right? Whether or what a data exchange approach we would have to take, right? Which means either we have to take an API or ETL or file transfer or data streaming, whatever, right, etc., etc. So that is why we also had to look into the data flow considerations while we were looking at that problem statement, right? Which means we looked at the data set, the how complex the data is. We also looked at how frequent the data needs an update, right? And along with that data flow, which means how the data was flowing from one system to another system, or how the data would flow from one system to another system. I mean, the frequency of data usage, which is the data versions, data security, and the data transformation complexity, how complex the data transformation would be required to use by data receivers, exchange method selection. So that is another aspect which we did along with the integration approach which we took, right? Now, having all this, integration, I would say integration approach and data culture taken into account, one of the aspects which we unconsciously, try to, I would say, forget or escape is the data quality dimensions, right? Because they are very small, but I would say with the new laws coming into the picture, these are becoming more and more critical, and that is another one of the dimensions. When we were proposing a framework, we had these, quality dimensions in mind. Obviously, these quality dimensions, obviously, I was segregated into three flavors of security: with security, access, confidentiality, and privacy, communication, interoperability, and information, which you see on the screen. But when and these are becoming more and more important because, as I mentioned, because there are new laws coming into the picture. Either we talk about GDPR or other aspects, right? One other aspect, while we're framing, is that when we frame the framework was to have the security. Well, we talk about security, right? I mean, to have we'll make the project secure, but we also need to ensure that these are validated, which means we need to bring a security person. Obviously, if the project is big enough, like in our project, we had a dedicated security guy to look into all these aspects. But if not, then you have to have use your ecosystem in your organization to bring someone, from having a security person, or similarly, if you're using a pipeline, or then you bring a DevOps person, or if you're doing a you have database, then you're using IT. So what we did was, by trying to framework was, try to have the combination of all these aspects so that these dimensions are met, right? I mean, these data quality dimensions, what you're mentioning, is obviously very, very easy, and obviously it's very straightforward, but these are very, very critical. That's what our point was, and that's what we also considered when we did this data governance or proposed this data governance model, which was successful in our project, right? And so I will not go spend much time, but I'll briefly mention accuracy, completeness, consistency, validity, timeliness, uniqueness, and obviously these are the data quality mentioned on the information side. And but if I go to the next one, which is I would say the security one, right? Then we have to look at security access, some degree to which your data is secure, degree to which your data is confidential, and a degree to which your data is integrated across data systems, right? And degree to which your data is protected against sensitive information. These were the dimensions which we looked into as well as part of the proposed framework which came up. You know, I mean, obviously for this, we just kept one of these slides. Just I will not spend much time on it, but we look at a simple example of consistency, right? Let's say you have a payment made by a customer, 5 payments, but in your system you only have 4. Then it means you are creating a big problem. Or even if you take a real world scenario, right? Let's say you are going into oil and industry, right? You have a person which has which is a land, which is oil, and you give it to a company or oil and gas company who extracts the money and extracts the oil and gives, like, let's say, zero point 0.9 cents fixed amount for a month. And zero point 0.9, you can just, 0.9 cents is nothing. But if you look on year to year basis and you don't give a tax or this means the government is not getting a revenue, then you are in a problem, right? That was the aspects you have to look into. That's why the data quality dimensions were becoming more and more important, and that's why we put it as well as probably proposed. Data governance, as mentioned by Sonal, obviously this was, it controls the data quality per se required for optimal function of the enterprise solution, and mentioning, as Sonal mentioned, takes into account the legal aspect as well, along with the different aspects. With the combination of all these aspects, we went into the what we call is the data, framework, which we came up. So this data framework was actually based on 3 major pillars, right? Technology, knowledge, and people, right? These were 3 pillars which we looked at too, and which obviously included the tools, the security management, the ownership, the data quality. Data quality, when I talk about it, I'm including the data approach, integration approach. We talk the data flow considerations, the ownership, and the documentation, right? Which means along with all these aspects, you also have to take into account your ecosystem, right? If it is if which what I mentioned, right? If you're talking about security, you need to look into have the business experts or the secure people or data science team, depending on if it's they're part of your system or not, or you are using it from your ecosystem. Similarly, DevOps. Similarly, you have to use your legally generally are not part of your core team, but you need to have them here for in terms of DPP and other aspects. So this was a framework which we came around, a proposed framework which we did for a bigger project, which helped us solve. I will probably move it back to Sonal to give us more insight of how we use that framework for other aspects. So over to you,
Right.
Sonal.
Yeah. So thanks, Sanjam. So as Sanjam said that we started with, so we would take inputs from based on the regulation boundaries under which the enterprise has to operate, the business specific inputs which tells us what data we need from the data science team and the business experts, and then we need the technology specific inputs from the infrastructure team, the DevOps team, and data security experts to understand and formulate a data governance specific for a project. So we did this, and as a part of the feedback from the project, as on October 2021, we have gone successfully live with the fifth release of the transformation project roadmap that we had for this customer. And some of the benefits where data played the key role was related to the 3 items that I have made, that I have put in the presentation. One was related to Qualtrics surveys, which was integrated at critical decision points in the application, leading to effective real-time feedback collection. So the moment you fill in the form, you get, or you are unable to fill the form, you get a feedback pop up, and you do the feedback there and then. And then they've added features to keep the contact details consistent across the application. Consistency is one of the qualities that Sanjam spoke about. And then they made the renewal and extension of expiring permissions intuitive and convenient for tax delegates. So there was real-time identity verification which was done using some of the data, yeah, some of the principles from the data quality management, then the project could successfully onboard more than 150 100,000 users from physical forms to the online solution, and there was marked reduction in payment delays with customized payment plans support. So again, we had also taken feedback from the internal team. So the product owner said that as we were spearheading the technical transformation from legacy systems, it was imperative for us to evaluate our boundaries with regard to data quality governance and also know who's responsible for which governance and which measure. So the framework was useful in asking the right questions at the right time. They could also discuss with customer. The project manager said that we knew that what we have to deal with, because security and the data was a new, and in the cloud world was a new term to begin with. So they knew what they need to deal with, and they could accordingly discuss with customer. And one of the feedback which we also received was that in absence of the framework, we would have probably spent 50% more effort in designing, developing data governance features. So I would now take you through the elements of the data quality governance. And for the next few slides, in order to explain a concept, I will use the examples from the public domain, which are available in the public domain, in order to bring forth a point. So this is not something specific to a customer, but more from the real life business problems that we can all access from the public um, domain. So there's a US restaurant chain, Dickie's Barbecue, which has more than 500 restaurants across United States. And what they have done is that they have developed a proprietary data system called Smokestack, which takes data from POS systems, marketing promotions, loyalty programs, and from the transactions that they have, including the inventory, and they use the data every 20 minutes to enable immediate decisions. They also use the data again for the daily corporate level meetings to decide on the strategies at the higher level. So now what they have clearly listed down is why they need the data, what are their intention with having the data, and for what purpose they're going to use it. Now, as from the quality data governance, it is imperative that we unambiguously document, in alignment with the business and product strategy, how what data we need and why we need that data. Now, the inputs would come from legal, business users, data privacy regulations which are relevant in that country, ethical policy of the organization, and the data policy that the organization has. So, especially if we involve some machine learning for the decision making, we have to document the impact assessment on humans, and we need to the intended checks that the software will have to ensure that that the decisions which are made by the machine are also reviewed by a human being, depending on the impact. So this is one audit requirement which is there, which is with regards to for what intent we want to use the data, and what would be the impact assessment on humans, and what checks are we keeping to ensure that we have reasonable checks in place to ensure the safety in general. So we next go to another example. So Netflix has published around 10 million movie rankings by around 500,000 customers as a part of the challenge for people to come up with better recommendation systems. Now, as in order to save the privacy of the users, what they did was they anonymized the data, the personal details. However, we had some researchers who could de-anonymize the data using the data which was available on IMDb and the timestamp information. So this is a business example where the anonymized data was de-anonymized using very less information which was available in the public domain. So what are the checks that are required is that within an organization, we need to ensure that we adhere to the data policy, keeping in mind the moral and ethical guidelines. Data anonymization, if it is done, has the project considered how can this be de-anonymized, and they have put the sufficient checks in place. Some of these are controls which are put through audit. Then we should have as much as possible automated authorizations to data sets across, which is governed by the authorization policy of the organization. And we should have automated data storage and deletion processes. So these are some of the things which are from the data sharing and storage. Then, with regards to data quality, one good example is from GolfTech. So, GolfTech has done a study where they had over 90 million swings, which they from the golfers, which they had taken. Which they had taken over a period of 20 years. Now, over the period of 20 years, the technology to take the measurements regarding the performance of the golfers has changed. So how do I calibrate this? How do I calibrate that the technology which I'm using now is also giving me the similar level of details as what I was getting using the old technology which was there 20 years back. So we need to ensure that with the heterogeneous data sources and data which has been captured over a long period of time, sufficient calibration has been done. And this is where you would strongly depend on your business users. This is not something that an ID team can do on its own. So again, depending on the kind of checks that we need, we have to take inputs from the business users, from the data science team, from the legal data privacy regulations, ethical policies, and the data policies of the organization. So automated checks, and this will again be a combination of automated checks, audit, and the manual checks. Automated checks are possible for if we take the input and we get to know that this is the data quality that we want to keep a continuous tab on. But manual checks from business experts to see when the data drift is a problem is something that will still be a manual process, a step which is there. Then we have to ensure now data availability is another example. So if there's a credit card company and it is tracking the transactions in the real time, they would want to know immediately as and when they see a suspicious activity on a credit card. So what we need to do as a part of an enterprise software is to ensure that we have the that we document the required level of performance to begin with at the time of design, and then we continuously monitor it during development and during go live after production also. So again, the kind of checks that we can do depends on the availability matrix that we have. We should have automated support which is built into the infrastructure for some of the data wherever possible. And again, we sometimes use the data loss prevention tools, and as an audit we can check whether the measures has been planned, designed, and monitored. So data monetization is probably another example. So now John Deere, which is a traditional tractor company, they have come up with an additional revenue stream where they have put the IoT sensors into the tractors, and based on the activity which they capture from the sensors, they give at a price to the farmers the details on what they can plan, on what additionally they should do. So this is something that, but then they're charging the farmers for this. But as a business, they also have to ensure that they're transparent, that we are giving you sensors, but the intended use of sensors is this and this, and this is what I'm going to use it for, and there is a potential reuse which I can do with your data based on based on the agreement that is there, which is there. So we need to ensure that we have the transparency measures in place which are designed and monitored across the software lifecycle. So again, similarly, we have how we collect the data. Data sourcing is also important. So Google had agreed to pay around $13 billion in a class action suit when they had accepted that yes, as a part of the Street View project, they had taken information which, apart from the street view, about the customers which were there in the vicinity. So we need to ensure that we have the right source of data, and we ensure appropriate usage and storage rights. Legal and data policy comes in as the main inputs who have to give our inputs here. So IBM Analytics, for example, uses the data, uses Twitter's 5 tweets per day to get they have their own revenue stream where with which customers can use the data on the Twitter to set up their own alerts. So business as an audit, we need to ensure that if we are using something, we have right contracts in place to use data technologies and infrastructures. That also includes open source. So again, legal team is the main team which gives the inputs here with DevOps and IT teams and data policy. So what we need to do here is that we have to ensure that we have sufficient and efficient data security mechanisms, legal compliance, and responsible governance in technology and infrastructure for the data usage. So, in order to conclude, the data governance is about technology, people, and process. And we have how do we come up with the data governance? We take the inputs from the regulation boundaries, the legal regulations, the organizational data policy, the moral and ethical boundaries within which the system has to operate, and the security policy of the organization. We get the business specific inputs on the kind of data that is required, how we and from the data science team and from the business experts, and then we get technology specific inputs from the IT experts, how much of data can we process from the DevOps team and from the data security experts. And to conclude, we would like to say that businesses are collecting and analyzing ever increasing amount of data. There are significant hurdles around data ownership and security. And if we fail to address these hurdles, we can expose businesses to potential lethal liabilities. It is vital to formulate the governance in context of legal, ethical, and business boundaries of the organization. And yeah, defining data quality governance is not an act in isolation. We need inputs from security, data security, IT, DevOps, and business experts. So with this, we can come to the Q&A part. Any questions?